Hey, I'm Decathlon Gamer, and this is the Gaming Decathlon Year in Review. First year, the Gaming Decathlon has come to its end, and as we start year number 2 in the competition, I wanted to take a look back and see some of the monumental things that stood out over the course of the year. We open up with channel analytics. As of the final day of the year, we have 91 subscriptions, so the little channel that could almost to 100 now, and I've had 14,000 views over the course of the year. And the neat statistic that's jumped out at me here is that minutes watched just in the last couple days passed 100,000 minutes watched on the channel. The most viewed video of the year was Pro Cycling Manager's Pro Cyclist Mode, the 2018 edition, and the first episode, so the start of the series, with 2,843 views as of yesterday on that, so 2.8 thousand, which is a pretty big chunk of that 14,000 overall. Moving on to the games and some overall statistics. There were 22 games that I played on the channel over the course of the year, and of course the Gaming Decathlon features 10 at any one time that I'm always trying to master. Of 22 games originally, 18 of those are independent titles. So in that category, there were essentially 4 games that were not independent. First off, Football Manager went from a 2018 to 2019 edition. Pro Cycling Manager went from a 2017 to a 2018 edition, so that's 2. And then also I had 2 games that I featured 2 different modes of the game. Pro Cycling Manager with Career and Pro Cyclist, only on the 2018 edition. And then F1 2018, where I added in to the standard career mode, I also had the Manager Challenge mode. And then for game studios, there were 14 separate game studios featured on the channel this year. The most featured studio was actually a 3-way tie with 3 different studios all having 3 games make it onto my channel this year. Those 3 studios: Paradox Development Studio, Codemasters, and then Cyanide. The primary features of those, Paradox, were grand strategy games in EU4, Stellaris, and what's the other one that I featured? CK2. And then Codemasters, Dirt Rally, and the F1 2018 modes. And then Cyanide was Pro Cycling Manager. The longest featured game was a tie, all 55 weeks, so from day 1 and still active are 2 games, those being Draft Day Sports College Basketball and Motorsport Manager have been throughout the history of the channel. On a side note, another longest series goes to Football Manager, where it's been one continuous series, but it's overlapped from one edition of the game to the next. The shortest series of the year was Oxygen Not Included at just 6 episodes. It actually was off to a decent enough start, but it fell into the transition period where I went from strategy games to all sports games. So it ended up being sacrificed a bit prematurely. Alright, let's move on. Now, game statistics. Game statistics here. So, part 1 of this, the highest scoring game put out on the channel this year, of course, if you've checked any of the weekly reviews, you would know the highest scoring game is Europa Universalis 4 with 757 points earned. So that's about 75% completion rate. of that possible 100, that score being 1,000, that target. The average game completion, 27%. So 22 games played, on average, that score based off of 1,000. I got 27% of the way there. The best week that I had in scoring was 2,336 points. Of course, that one also shows up in the weekly review. But what doesn't show up is that it happened in week 32 of the competition. So it's been months now since then. Of course, we just wrapped up week 55, so that was 23 weeks ago. Just an added note that the second best week was only 1 point lower, 2,335 points, just a few weeks prior to the week 32 mark. That happened in week 29. And I've gone over 2,300, I think, 2 other times as well. So I've hovered right around that mark quite a few times. I would love to see here in year 2 that I eclipse at least the 2,500 mark, which is essentially a quarter of the way to the overall target. The worst week, with just 188 points, of course, fell in week number 1 when I was just getting started. So that first week, right out the box, I grabbed 188 points. It's been much more ever since. And my average weekly score, this is a neat one. So 55 weeks, taking the average score of each of those 55 weeks is 1,513.8 points. So about 1,500 points per week. It'll be interesting to see how that transfers into year 2, to see whether that goes up. I would hope that that score does rise in year number 2. Biggest gain is 401. So from 1 week score to the next, the biggest gain that I ever had was 401 points. That took place in week 43, where I scored 2,141 points, which was 401 points higher than the week before, in the 1,700 range. The biggest drop, actually, was just a couple weeks later, as I went from a near record 2,317 and dropped by 952 points in week 45. The virtual best, here's some landmarks and when I hit them. I reached 1,000 points in the virtual best, so all-time top 10 best scores. I hit 1,000 in just week 6, so that was pretty quick to get to 1,000. I hit 2,000 14 weeks later in week 20, and then it took another 13 weeks to get to 3,000, and then finally we hit the 4,000 landmark again 13 weeks later in week 46. So we've been pretty consistent on that, other than that there was a pretty good gap between the first and second landmarks there. So we slowed down a little bit, but it was actually only by, 1 week? So other than getting a quick start and getting week 6 on that first landmark, we've been pretty consistent on hitting those landmarks throughout. Now, in year 2, I'm going to start hitting some other landmarks. Gaming Decathlon is, of course, based on the real-world Olympic decathlon, and using a similar scoring system. So I'm actually going to draw comparisons to the real-life decathletes. And my very first landmark of that, I'm actually extremely close to. I'm just a week or 2 away from hitting the first real-world landmark. So we'll start to see some other landmarks just besides the 1,000 marks. And finally, the virtual best average weekly gain. On average, I picked up 80 points. 80 and a quarter, actually. So 80 points added to the virtual best on a weekly basis. Now, that's one score that I actually predict is going to drop some. Essentially, and if you think about it like grades, if you want to earn a grade in a class, you can work and work and work and work and get 90% on everything and have an A, and you don't turn in one assignment, you get a 0, and it really drops your score. The other way around, if you never do your work and you have a 0 in the class, you turn in one assignment, and next thing you know, you're still failing, but you've got, like a 25% class. So you see massive statistical jumps. I'm predicting that something similar to that's going to happen, that the increase rate is going to slow down. And actually, in the last handful of weeks, I have seen the rate of increase start to slow down a bit. All right, moving on. The final category here is Game Awards. Now, these awards were not voted on by anyone else. I came up with them myself. However, in future years, as the channel grows, I would be thrilled to put this out to the community to maybe I'll present a few nominations and the community will vote on them in future years. But I picked a few key highlights and decided to give them as channel awards. So first up is the Game of the Year. It has to go to my all-time personal favorite game, and because it was the highest scoring game on the channel this year, Game of the Year goes to Europa Universalis 4. Worst Game of the Year sadly goes to the most frustrating experience that I had in the year, and the only game out of 22 to feature a final score of 0 in the virtual best category, and that is Draft Esports Pro Golf. Unfortunately, it is a game that only received a single update after launch and got brushed aside, and the game was not balanced. The first update did a lot to help the balancing on the game. It desperately needed a second update, and it never came. And even though it was actually a relatively popular game on the channel, the frustration continued. I restarted so many times trying to make it work, desperately wanting to see that game succeed. Loved the concept, but it just did not come together, and it did not receive the love that it deserved. Next up was the most fun game of the year, and that goes to Pro Cycling Manager. Both the 2017-2018 edition, non-discriminatory on that, but in particular the Pro Cycling Manager Pro Cyclist mode of the 2018 edition. If I had to give it to just one, it would go there, as I had a ton of fun playing that one, and it definitely was the most popular, which is our next award. So most popular game, Pro Cycling Manager, again with the Pro Cyclist mode. That was definitely the game of the year from the fans' perspective, at least in terms of how many people were watching, how many people were commenting, and how often I was able to celebrate quite energetically at successes in the game. Saddest moment of the year for me, sadly, goes to Overcooked 2. I had high hopes for that one when adding it to the channel. If you don't know this, if you didn't see this, which I'm guessing you didn't, because it was actually a contender for worst game of the year in terms of popularity in about 11 episodes, I think, in total. Though it's been a long time since I've checked, so maybe it's changed a little bit. But in total, there were fewer than 10 views for 11 episodes. Overall, it was a train wreck in that department. But the reason why I found it to be the saddest was I actually got my wife to join me on the channel for that, and we were playing co-op. And that, as an experience for me, not everybody is the same. Not everybody likes playing with individuals who aren't that into gaming and helping them through co-op campaigns. but for me, it was something I thoroughly enjoyed, especially that it was my wife. That, getting her support on games, getting her support while I've been going through this channel has been a big thing for me. And having her support in that and getting her to play one of the games on the channel together, for me, was very exciting and a lot of fun. And it was very sad that the game just did not take off. So again, when I made the changeover to eliminate the strategy games, that game came in, and I was trying to call it a sports game, competitive cooking. That's not really a sports game. And it just did not seem to fit the mold of the channel anymore. So I was sad to see that one go. And I'll be hard pressed to find another game that could feature my wife alongside me. So, goals, objectives for year 2. I want to keep hitting those landmarks, keep growing the channel. I love all the support. I love how it is continuing to rise. I'm getting comments almost daily now. And I do try to respond to most, if not all of those. But thank you, everyone, for a fantastic year. And I look forward to year 2. Now, all of the series, they continue on as is. This is just a statistical stopping point and nothing else. So no resets on games or anything like that as we head into year 2. Gaming Decathlon continues as is with the current set of games. And glancing back to the weekly review, none of the games reached an end point of some kind, no seasons wrapping up or anything. So all of them will continue next week, and the scores will continue to rise. So thank you for joining me, and tune in again next time as I continue my journey on the road to the record in the Gaming Decathlon. Bye for now.